Hello everyone, I'm Eternal Flame here, and today I'm here to do a retrospective on something that has been on my mind for a pretty long while, that being the Invincible War. The Invincible War was one of the biggest events to come out of Season 3 of Invincible, right behind the battle against Conquest, where we see several characters have to push and go up against evil variants of Mark, evil versions of Invincible that could have easily happened, but thankfully didn't. All done by Angstrom Levy and his return in order to get revenge on Invincible and try and ruin his reputation in this world. A massive war that spans across 3 days and 1 episode. All of it leading into Mark being in one of his worst emotional states that he had been in a while, right before he had to battle against Conquest right after. But in this video, I wanted to explore if the Invincible War was actually good, if it was overrated, or if it was just good with more potential than it had, or if it was actually bad. Basically, welcome to my retrospective on the Invincible War. Now up first, I do want to go over what the narrative purpose of the Invincible War is before I even get into my thoughts on it. The narrative purpose of the Invincible War can be split up into a couple of points, with the first point being a pretty simple one, to show the world why they got the good mark, and why it's important to have that mark, because we see what the evil marks are capable of. Because Mark had so many chances to go evil and he ended up not doing so. This is especially well shown, at least in my opinion, during the Immortal versus No Goggles battle, where I feel like it was at that point the Immortal really started to respect Invincible as a person rather than ever before, with him outright calling the Invincible he was facing off against a pale imitation of the true Invincible, which has a far cry from Immortal at the start of the series, where early on he was cautious about Invincible, thinking he might become another Omniman, and he was thinking that Invincible was a brat who was just throwing around their power. But now after the Invincible War, he did gain some respect for Invincible, mainly because he'd seen what he could end up becoming. It makes those close to Invincible appreciate Invincible for being as good of a person he was. But it also has a second narrative purpose, which that second purpose, at least in my opinion, is to be the final nail in the coffin for some of Cecil's arguments. The Invincible War showed why these precautions are necessary. It showed why they need to prepare for in case something like this were to happen, because they currently don't have any defenses against Viltrumites other than what Cecil had built and Mark himself. And while several parts of the planet did get destroyed, without Cecil it would have been a lot worse. After all, Cecil was responsible for the death of at least 3 of the Invincible variants. And those are the ones that were killed by the Reaniman. Keep in mind, one of them was also Hoodvincible, who I have an entire video going over why that man is an absolute monster. But thanks to this, it proved Cecil's planning was more than necessary. After all, the Earth needed more defenses and Mark wasn't always reliable. Mark was a bit too emotional during that war, and it proved Cecil's point as necessary for needing these precautions. Even if it was from people that Mark definitely didn't like, it still proved that it was necessary in this case, or else the planet would have been screwed over completely. Not to mention by what the characters know, if it wasn't for Cecil, Adam Eve would have been dead right then and there. Now thanks to the Conquest fight, we know that Adam Eve would not have died from that, but at the same time, there's also a pretty good chance Omnimark might have actually known that as well and prepared something for it. After all, we do know Omnimark was actually aware of Adam Eve's abilities, which is why I think he went for the leg break and he was aware of her. But yeah, the second narrative purpose of this was to reveal why Cecil's plans were absolutely necessary. The third narrative purpose of the Invincible War was to close off Rexplode's character while introducing new characters. I'm not going to go too in depth with closing off Rexplode's character. I don't think it's necessary. Anyone who's watched the show already knows how the Invincible War perfectly closed off his character, especially in the TV show. But the Invincible War also did well in introducing brand new Earth heroes, including like of Tech Jacket, who's going to be really important in the future. And finally, the fourth and most important part was putting Invincible in the emotional state necessary to battle against Conquest, where he is going into this battle already feeling terrible about himself and needing to take out some stress on something, and that something of course is going to be Conquest. And I think it solves all 3 of these narratives pretty well. I think it does extremely well in accomplishing its goal, especially for the Rexplode narrative and the Cecil being right narrative. So as a narrative tool, it serves the intended purpose of what it's supposed to be, at least by my interpretation. Now I will say it might be serving a different narrative purpose than even what I mentioned in this video, and if it is, please comment it down below. I love reading all comments and learning things, so yeah. But these are at least the main core narrative purposes that I can come up with off the top of my head, which it definitely does well in serving and does well in a good manner. The Invincible War also does well with helping to build into one of the core big themes of Season 3. Which that core theme is the lesson that Mark has to learn of that some people needed to die. That some threats need to be killed. Because if Mark had successfully killed Angstrom Levy and intentionally went for the kill on him, none of this would have happened. This all happened because Mark killed Angstrom Levy out of rage rather than trying to eliminate a threat. Because he killed him by accident, letting his emotions take the better of him, rather than killing him because of how much of a threat that someone like Angstrom Levy could possess, especially because of how insane Angstrom Levy is and his powers. And now, not just will the people around him have to pay the price, but the people on the planet itself will have to pay the price with him. And not just does it have good narrative themes, it also does have some really good interactions as well. Like, out of all the Invincible variants, the 4 that really steal the show, at least for me, has to be No Goggles Invincible, Retro Invincible, Omnimark, and finally Shiesty Invincible. Omnimark and Shiesty Invincible just have such a good dynamic, and yes, I know I called him Hood Invincible earlier in the video, but that's just a dumb name and I don't know why Amazon called him that. Retro Invincible's entire battle with the Teen Team was really good. Like, it just showed how scary a calm and calculated Invincible would be, because he actually felt more like a serial killer than anything else. And then there was No Goggles Invincible, who was just a fight goblin. He was absolutely enjoying that battle and just having the time of his life. Not to mention his entire
Help! I don't want to not be living!
Not to mention Mohawk Mark as well, who was really entertaining. He wasn't one of the big stars for me, but he was definitely one of the fun ones to watch. I already talked about Rex Bode and Immortal because they did some pretty good things in this arc as well, at least for me, especially the Immortal because he was kinda underrated. I don't mean like in a fight, but more so just some of the dialogue the Immortal does shows how much this has actually changed his mind and thoughts. Because now the Immortal is just seeing his fears come to reality in No Goggles Invincible and is thankful that the real Invincible is nothing like this and will never be anything like this. It has some interesting moments of combat as well. In particular, I think the Guardians of the Globe fight and the Teen Team fight was by far and away the best. So yeah, the Invincible War definitely has some amazing moments to it. Not to mention Invincible versus Angstrom Levy's final battle is also pretty interesting, but while I do think the Invincible War is definitely a really good episode, I do also have to say that there is some missing potential when it comes to the Invincible War and how it's formatted. Now, in my opinion, the Invincible War is good. It is a solid 6.5 to 7 out of 10, but it has the merits to become a 10 out of 10 episode and best episode or episodes in the series for a couple of reasons. However, it doesn't fully go in on that potential. Now, I also get that part of it is also a meta-analysis of the trope of the multiverse and going too in-depth with it, which is why the Invincible War is so short. And the Invincible War in the comics is literally just a massive crossover event for the sake of being a crossover event, but at the same time, I feel the Invincible War has so much more potential if it was extended and just some scenes were extended and expanded upon, which they definitely have the money to do. Or at least they should be able to get the money to do if Amazon actually cared about making money. Because while the Invincible War is definitely cool, and I love it for what it is, it could have had so much more potential if it was just expanded upon and some more scenes were seen. I just think it has so much more potential. It also does have one innate issue with it, but that's more of a me personal thing, and I think I might make an entirely different video on it, which is my feelings on Angstrom Levy, but I don't want to talk about that in this video because that's more of a wider spanning issue. Instead, I want to talk about some missed opportunities that I think would have been really cool to include, but just didn't get included. Now, this isn't going to be all of the missed opportunities, but these are going to be some that at least I can think of. Now, of course, if you don't want to hear these missed opportunities and you just think the Invincible War is perfect the way it is, then I fully understand that, but it's just going to be me talking about the missed opportunities that would have made this arc better, at least in my opinion. With one of the ones, and this is probably the most obvious one, at least in my opinion, is I feel we really should have gone much more in depth with the Oliver versus Evil Invincible battle that he battled against. After all, if there was anyone, and I mean anyone besides Invincible himself, who would be affected heavily emotionally by having to battle against an evil variant of Invincible, it would be his own little brother, the one who had been basically trained and raised by Mark. Especially considering Oliver is still a brand new hero and still getting adjusted to all of this. So imagine having to see his mental state and how he is affected by basically having to fight against an evil version of his brother. And while he might know, of course, it's not his brother, but now he has to deal with that thought being in his head. But at least we can tell there's barely any impact from the Invincible War on Oliver's mind. I think it would be really interesting to see that explored through the battle. Because like, if there's any character who I'd want to see emotionally have to process and deal with it, it would be Oliver. And it's kind of honestly the biggest missed opportunity to the point where I consider it an issue that we don't actually see that go more into depth, because there is so much potential with Oliver not really getting that many moments in the Invincible War. There are also other interactions that I think would have been interesting. Like, I would have absolutely loved to see Invincible have to go up against either Viltrum Invincible or Sinister Mark. Especially Viltrum Invincible. With the previous season ending with him trying to refuse the Viltrumite Empire and trying his best to make sure he didn't fall down their path and instead prepared to fight against them, it would be really cool to see him fight against a version of himself that might have given in. Especially because one of the biggest speculations about Viltrumite Mark is that he lost the fight to Omniman and was forcibly taken to the Viltrumite Empire, and the part of him that used to be Mark was forced out. So seeing a Viltrumite Mark, one that went down the Viltrum path and basically lost and had to go to the Viltrumite way without his own choice, fighting against a Mark who could be everything that he wanted to be, would be really interesting. And it would also be interesting for Mark himself to see the worst possible timeline, one where he had to go down the path of a Viltrumite. or directly seeing Sinister Mark. After all, Sinister Mark I would say is the most evil out of all of them, seeing a version of himself that ended up winning the battle against Omni-Man and killing his own father, effectively taking over the planet. These are the two most interesting interactions I can see Mark having, but there are definitely other interesting ones as well based on the mannerisms several of the Mark had. In particular, with Sinister Mark, I would frame it as Mark actually losing to Sinister Mark as well, just to make Mark question if he really went down the right path. Because this Mark that could represent his worst fears, him becoming an evil dictator, ends up being the stronger one than him. And seeing him battle against Viltrum Mark could be really interesting, where either they can play it as Viltrum Mark is just far too gone, or they could play it that there's just some small glimmer of hope that ends up spawning in Viltrum Mark. There are just so many interesting angles that could be played using the Invincible War that's not really played. The Invincible War, at least in my opinion, suffers most from a big issue of not being that big time-wise. After all, the length of the entire Invincible War is less time than the entirety of the Conquest versus Invincible fight. A 3-day war that is mostly off-screened is less time than the Conquest versus Invincible fight. Now, I'm not saying I want this to be some 300 episode spanning war like a certain other series did, Naruto. I'm just saying I think it would have been better if more time was given. Like, one more episode, or even like a couple more scenes, because I don't think that many things need to be expanded upon. Just give some more time for some more interactions, or even more time to focus on some of the already existing battles. Like, we already had Oliver versus one of the Cap Invincibles about to happen, it's just most of it got off-screened, which I think is a massive shame. But that's also because of what one of the big purposes of the Invincible War actually is. It is the prelude to the Conquest fight. It was not made to be a finale, it was made to be what was going to happen before the Conquest battle to put Invincible in that emotional state. Which is also kind of why it gets immediately overshadowed by the Conquest battle as well. Because the big bad of this season was not supposed to be Angstrom and the several evil Invincible variants, but Conquest himself. Those just lead me to having a little bit of a fear that the next season is not going to have the Invincible War have any emotional effects on Mark, but at the same time I had faith in the show. They really showed how well Mark killing Angstrom affected his mentality and his emotional state, so I definitely think that this is going to have some impact on his personality, seeing so many evil Invincibles around, and that's going to change him for the better, I hope. Because while the Conquest fight is going to push him to get stronger, I hope the Invincible War ends up pushing Mark to become a better person. Now, Mark's already a good person, but I hope it pushes him to stay on that path. But overall, at least in my opinion, I do believe the Invincible War was an amazing event. It did its part of the plot that it was necessary for. It gave us a lot of new possibilities that could be interesting to speculate on, because there are so many Invincible variants that we know little about. And it would be really cool if Amazon ended up making like a show where it showed each of the Invincible variants' backstories, but I know they won't. Please prove me wrong, Amazon. It was one of the good uses of the multiverse, where they didn't just use it for cheap cameos, they used it to have an actual effect on the plot, mainly because now Mark can see all the evil variants of him around. It caused much destruction across the entire world that is still going to have consequences because Invincible is going to have to actively help to repair them, and most of all, it was used to amazing effect in allowing several of the characters to develop, and even for some to completely finish their arcs. Like Rexplode completely finished his arc in the Invincible War, but ultimately it does still have so much missed potential. I love it for what it is, but I wish it could have been more. Which is ultimately my opinion on the Invincible War after having some more time to think on it, but I want to see what you guys think in the comment section down below. Do you guys think the Invincible War was good? Do you guys think that there are some things that are missing, or do you guys think it was perfect the way it was? I want to hear what y'all think in the comment section down below. I hope y'all have a good day. Goodbye.